why I love you. I love you, friend.
All right, what are we doing? We're doing, I'm going to read his bio and ask the first question, which means I'm going to ask you.
You ask me, I'll ask you. Yep,
Yeah.
You ask
Okay.
me, I ask you.
Okay. All right, ready to do the camera, the photo, the movie thing there, and cut. David, I don't know. That was a cutting board. What you just did. That's not the same. So you got to do the. All right, and scene. Jessica Aberhart. I don't know if I've ever used your full name before.
I don't know. I don't know that people even know my old name is Jessica.
I said it, and I immediately got self-conscious. I was like, is that okay? Can I do that? You've never called me by my full name.
My mom would love it. Yeah, Robert Shields.
There it is.
I've never done that.
Yeah, that's weird. That makes me feel like you're like my 5th grade teacher or something, and I'm in trouble.
Robert.
I'm going to the principal's office. Oh no.
It's good to see you, friend.
Yes. Whatever name you feel like responding to. How are you doing? Catch me up.
Well, I'm doing well. We're firmly in December now, getting ready to go into Christmas and New Year's, which is exciting. I just got back. I was sharing with you right before we started recording. I just got back from New York City, Manhattan, for a quick turnaround, quick turn and burn is what I like to call it, to celebrate the life and legacy of Stuart Scott, who some of you will know that name, or you'll be like, that sounds familiar. Stuart Scott was an anchor on ESPN and just a great, father and of 2 amazing young ladies and an amazing brother to one of my closest friends. And so that's how I was invited up to celebrate with him for the Jimmy V Foundation at the Voices of Victory fundraiser. And the theme of it was called Booyah. So if you know Stuart, he used to do that on ESPN. He also used to say he was cooler than the other
side
people
of the
were
pillow.
cooler than the other side of the pillow. Yeah.
That was
so, tons of fun. It was great to just be around other people who were really there to celebrate. And Jay Harris emceed and Hill Harper. They both were on stage and representing his foundation and their fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. So it was just cool to be around people who had those personal stories, but also were able to talk about impact. So many times we like idealize celebrities, but they really spoke to Stuart as a man and just what he meant to them as a friend. And so it was really cool. It was just nice to be in that space and honor him. It's also just really nice to be in New York City in Christmas time because it's beautiful. So, and I have never been to New York at Christmas time. So it was kind of like my Midwestern girl, Norman Rockwell mindset just came out. I was geeking out on everything, including Macy's department store. So I did all the things.
That's awesome. Yeah. As you're sharing about Stuart Scott, I only knew him from ESPN, and he would come do the Midnight Madness with at UNC as a Tar Heel alum. And
that's right.
But it's so cool to hear you say, like, as someone who, like, he's famous. He a lot of people know his name, but makes me think of that. I heard, the difference between eulogy virtues and resume virtues, and like how when you pass on and people are honoring your legacy, what really matters is the eulogy virtue. The things they talk about were your kindness and the type of person you were to those around you. And instead of, all I know is his resume virtues. Like, he was a sports anchor, but like, that's not what they talk about when you go and spend time with his family and celebrate his life, which is a cool reminder. I almost feel like, that theme of legacy is going to permeate today a little bit. So for me, my check-in, I am really excited to use my short amount of time. Usually, I feel like it's always 1 minute, but I think it's longer. I think I talk usually for a lot longer than that on my personal check-ins. But whatever amount of time you usually give me, Jess, to cede to a good friend of mine who also left a really profound legacy in my life. We've never on the Just Podcast never really done any type of fundraising. Those costs have been generously underwritten by sponsors and donors, and so never really asked our listeners to take an action as far as giving, to us directly. And we're still not going to do that. But we're at the end of the year. Our listeners are listening to this, 2 weeks before the beginning of the new year, which is the time where people are looking to make investments. And, there was someone who came across that I got to meet through ReCity years ago. His name was Connell Green. Connell Green was an entrepreneur, local to Durham, aspiring baker. He overcame a tragic accident early in his life where he had to relearn how to talk, how to read and write. But this man's tenacity and resiliency was something that was such a blessing to me. He wore a lot of hats. He was my friend. He was a mentor. We would go shoot pool at the local bowling alley here in Durham, and we just talk about fatherhood. He had a son. He still has a son that's my age. And so I would just sit there. He would teach me how to play pool, and he'd teach me how to be a dad. And he passed away during COVID, not because of COVID, but passed away suddenly due to an unrelated illness during the pandemic. And so, I attended his funeral, but as far as the Re-City community and the people who really care about, that ecosystem and have come together kind of as like a ragtag family, we've never really had a chance collectively to celebrate his life. And so we thought this would be a really cool way to do that. The church that he attended just down the street in Durham set up a college fund for his 2 grandchildren. And so I think what I want to plug in my personal check-in is, hey, if you have been blessed by this podcast, if we're now over 50 episodes into this thing, and if this has been something that has helped you on your justice journey, we would invite you to honor that and pass it forward by investing maybe in the next generation, investing in education, investing in the next generation of entrepreneurs. Connell is a legacy entrepreneur. His whole family, eats, sleeps, and breathes it. And I think that would be a really neat way for us to lift up kind of the people who have been meaningful to us and have also been meaningful to this work in many ways. He was an active part of everything that the Re-City podcast represents. And so we're going to drop that link into the show notes. We'll also be posting it all on our social media at the podcast just. You can get it throughout the rest of December. We'll have that link live, and would love for you to help reach that goal that we set to be able to make that happen for Connell's family. I think that he'd be looking down and smiling and probably be saying, "Hey, Rob, if I could, I'd be baking you up a batch of fresh cookies right now," because that was always what his thing was. He was always walking around Re-City handing out cookies and trying to land that next catering gig for your next event or wedding. So.
Very nice. I love that, Rob.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. That's great.
No. Oh, so speaking of people who've had an impact, I think that's a really great transition to our guest. We're gonna break ground here in many ways. This is going to be an episode of firsts and have our first repeat guest back onto the podcast, the Tom Hanks of the Just podcast, if you will. That joke about how Tom Hanks is co-hosted or hosted SNL, Saturday Night Live, holds the record. I don't know how many times it is, but it's like over in the double digits. So David Spickard of season 2 fame, we're inviting him back on. David, we're so grateful to have you back. Welcome back to the Just podcast.
Wow. I know for sure I've never been connected to Tom Hanks. So that's a real compliment and privilege. I appreciate that, Rob. It's really great to be back with you and Jess.
Yeah, well,
great to see you, friend.
Yeah, we're honored to see you, and this is going to be a great conversation because the 3 of our worlds intersect, not just through this podcast, but really in many ways, meaningful work that overlaps in each of our spheres. And so I think that Jess and I are both really excited. We love meeting new people, but we also love connecting with old friends and kind of co-laborers in this work. And so you check off that second box for sure. And maybe you can also have the same acting ability as Tom Hanks. We don't know.
I'm sure that will not happen.
All right, you're not going to use this to launch your acting career. This is not going to be what happens for this podcast. Okay,
that's right.
Yeah, no, David's like, fair. That is not my ministry. My gifts lie elsewhere.
No.
Yeah. I know my lane, that's right. And that is not my lane.
Fair enough. Well, let's get to your lane, and because it is quite the lane. And for those of you who are listening that did not hear the first episode that we did with David back in season 2, you can find it early on in season 2. How to Be a Just Leader was the name of the title. You'll actually see that there's a follow-up episode as well immediately following it, because we had such a nuanced conversation with you, David, that we had to bring you immediately back on because we were debriefing on it, and we were like, we kind of need him to be a part of this, because help us process through what you're saying, because it was hard to wrap our minds around a little bit. And I'm excited to kind of return to that conversation and kind of catch up on more of what you've been doing since September of last year. Because, man, it's been quite the 18 months for all of us, and would love for you to speak on kind of what you're seeing in the landscape of leadership and just leadership since then, because it's been kind of a crazy ride. But for those of you who have not, I would encourage you to pause now, maybe either listen to that one I think it's a good prequel to this conversation. If you like watching movies in the right order, I would go back. If you're more of like I like watching it and then finding about the origin story, you can do that. There's really not I don't think it can work either way. But for those of you who are new to David's story, David is passionate about helping leaders thrive so their people thrive and ultimately their communities thrive. He's the president of Spicker Consulting, a leadership development company based in Raleigh, North Carolina, that works with CEOs and their leadership teams to strengthen their leadership, culture, strategy, and impact. In addition to that, he's created the Just Leadership Project, which engages CEOs and leaders of influence to learn how to navigate issues of justice to affect real change and leave a lasting legacy. Prior to starting Spicker Consulting, David was the CEO of Jobs for Life, a global nonprofit organization which provides pathways for unemployed and underemployed men and women to experience the dignity of work. Under his 18 years of leadership, JFL grew from a local work in Raleigh to a global network of churches, community organizations, and businesses in over 450 cities and 10 countries. That's a lot. Along the way, David mobilized thousands of leaders to provide practical solutions for poverty and joblessness in the U.S. and across the world. And most recently, which we're really excited to talk to you about, he's created a framework around the 4 qualities of a just leader. And he's currently in the process of turning that framework into a book, his first book, which will be coming out early next year. So we're going to be able to then add author extraordinaire and aspiring actor to his bio when we bring him back for the 4th time.
Awesome. Just add whatever you want, Rob.
I was going to say, you just keep getting credits added to your...
I'm going to do it. Maybe I missed my calling. Talk about missing your calling. Maybe I should write people's bios for a living. I get really excited to do that.
Write their bios and make them live up to it. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe it's
you're setting the bar very high.
Yeah. Is it crippling? Maybe I should check with people first before reading and making it up on the fly. Yeah, I'll workshop it.
I like to under promise and over deliver if I can.
Okay, well, that's not really what we're about here, David. We're about setting a high bar and then our guests always exceeding that bar. So I have no doubt that you'll do that. It hasn't happened to us yet, and after this, I'm just going to go take a master class on biography writing. All right. So David, the floor is yours. I want to start maybe at the most recent, which is your book. You got a book coming out. We've never had a guest come on the podcast and then start to write a book. So this is a first for us. We haven't been able to actually read it yet, even though I think Jess and I have experienced some of the content in real time in some of our work that's overlapped with yours. But for our listeners, why this book and why now?
Yeah, so the book, honestly, I've always wanted to say I was an author, but I probably didn't want to go through the process of actually writing a book. I just wanted it to appear, just like that. But as I began to do the Just Leadership groups, which you mentioned, these groups that are made up of business CEOs and executive leaders who are going through a cohort experience that I put together where I'm facilitating content of what it looks like to be a just leader. And we're doing that over the course of 2 years. All of a sudden, I sort of looked up and said, wow, this is content that could easily be put into a book. And so it wasn't necessarily my goal from the outset to put this in a book. Honestly, I had people who affirmed that idea. They just naturally saw that the content was structured in such a way that it was easily able to be put into chapters and it flowed and things like that. So I began to think about what would it look like for me to just begin to start writing. And I've gotten some help, which is awesome, to help me kind of take my thoughts and put them into the kind of writing that I think would draw people in to the ideas that we're presenting in Just Leadership. The hope is to have another vehicle to get, to plant a seed for people who are interested in this idea of what it means to be just or to engage issues of justice and to see how that plants some seeds for people who, again, want to wrestle with these issues and then think through how they want to take some next steps.
Yes.
In terms of why now, wow. I mean, I've said this before, but my work with Jobs for Life, over almost 20 years, I started, and we always dealt with these issues of justice and poverty and race and power, particularly in communities of need, and always those issues always felt landed with deaf ears with people of power and influence. They liked the ideas of the issues that we were dealing with, but they didn't really engage them in a way that they saw their role in those issues. And I think with all that's happened over the last, particularly 2 years, there's an awareness and a recognition more than ever by people in positions of power that they need to understand what's going on, know how to lead through the issues that are now being presented to them, and they need to know what to do. And a lot of them don't really know what to do. So I think the timing is just natural. I didn't plan it. It just kind of happened, but it's very relevant to what's going on around us.
Yeah, that's a great segue because I'm so curious. Thank you, David. I'm really excited that you're taking what you've been applying, this practical application in the last couple of years, 18 months for sure, where I've seen you engage in this and putting it down so that it can be scalable. I'm a big fan of scalability. That's why we're doing a podcast and not just an event, right? For 30 people. Rob always reminds me that's the point of podcasts is reach. And so what you're doing is answering the call for reach and being able to get this message out globally, internationally, right? Which I think is amazing. And so I'm curious, I'm big on leadership. My background's in leadership. And the one thing I tell people always when they start to talk to me about their leadership style or the challenges around leadership is, and I think I've probably said on this podcast at least once, but one of my mentors, Colonel Joe LaBeouf, who Rob knows, has said often, he always says this, that leadership is hard and inconvenient. It's hard and inconvenient. And it's become even harder. And I would say that people would, if they're honest, has become more inconvenient because we've had to get uncomfortable and outside our margins that we've created for ourselves over the last couple of years. I'd love from your perspective, if you can maybe just share with us what you've seen over the last couple of years, how leadership has changed in the people around you, because you're serving and working with CEOs and high-level executives. How has it changed? And even you personally, how has your leadership changed in the last couple of years?
Wow, that's good. So in terms of the leaders that I'm working with, in some ways it's across the board because, some I've been working with have been completely overwhelmed. The work that they are doing or the environments that they're in, they're continually in a crisis mode. And then there are other leaders who have thrived and they have done extremely well. But across the board, whether they've struggled or thrived, I think there's a greater, what I've seen across the board is that there is a greater awareness of how they need to invest in their people. And that's always been the challenge that I've had. In fact, when I come and I walk with leaders and coach them one-on-one, or when I walk with them and their leadership teams, the challenge is always how are they now leading in and through their people and investing in them in such a way that they can thrive. And it sounds obvious, but for many people, that is a very difficult skill for them to develop and to implement. And especially now when we're more disconnected, where people are having to figure out how to keep people accountable, but also offering more flexibility because of the need to be distant in light of the pandemic. And then when you throw in the justice pieces of this, particularly for leaders who have not had experience with this or knowing how to respond when issues in our communities really bubble up, what do they say and what do they do to respond when a key issue happens and their people are reacting in such a way that they need to speak into that? Yeah. And so I've had to really come alongside some of those leaders and say, you need to say something right now. and they say, whoa, oh, okay. Okay, so what do I say? Well, I said, we have to walk with you to make sure that whatever you say is also you. And it's not just to say some canned response that everybody expects you to make in light of this issue that's happening in the community, but is authentically you and helps people understand how you are sensitive to these issues, but are doing it from the place where you are on this journey that you're personally on in dealing with these issues. So that requires a lot of coaching. It requires a new set of eyes and lenses for people to have that they didn't realize that they had before. It opens them up to a level of vulnerability that they didn't have before, which is good. It opens them up to being more sensitive. But at the end of the day, too, they have to figure out how to be profitable, how to, be competitive. Sure. And so, you have to elevate your leadership to be awesome. Like you have to be when we're doing these just leadership experiences and cohort and training, I'm telling these leaders, look, the environment now is requiring you to be varsity. In order for you to be profitable, be competitive, and also be just, you've got to bring your A game. And so there are new skills and new ideas and new awareness that everyone needs to have to build on what they're good at so that they can do what you said, which is invest in people who are extremely complex, very messy, and our environment has gotten even messier. So if we're not paying attention to that as business leaders in particular and staying ahead of the wave, or at least keep up with the wave, we're going to be way behind. It's almost like, you miss the trend. Like here's a new market that's coming and a new product that we need to prepare for. And we totally missed it because we just weren't thinking ahead about how we need to position ourselves for that new product or that new market. It's the same thing with being just, being culturally aware, knowing how to lead in this complex time.
That's a word for me. That's a word for me, David. So good. That's so good. Varsity, JV to varsity, and thinking and planning strategically ahead for where we're going, not where we are. I mean, again, business leaders think about this. We say it, but it's, you got to practically put that thing into action if you're actually going to play in the big league. So thank you for that. That personally resonated with me as business owner. It's great.
Yeah. And I think I'm not alone. Like I'm sure many of our listeners are hearing you share that, David. And they're like, man, we got the emails, whether it was from our boss or from, some network we were a part of. It felt like a lot of people in business were racing to say the right things after last summer. And David, you aren't saying the opposite of that. You're just saying they don't need to be the perfect words. They need to be your words. And they're first of all, you need to say something. They need to be your words, but also there needs to be this humility to it and vulnerability to say everyone was so desperate to prove that they were on the side of the angels, right? In a kind of a post George Floyd world to say, okay, I need to separate myself from that. But I think there can be a way where we actually communicate the wrong message of saying, I'm actually further along in my own journey than I actually am. And the real vulnerability wouldn't be the polished statement that you borrowed from online or someone gave to you as a script, but true, bold, courageous action is, hey guys, I'm not where I should be on this. I'm learning and I need to listen and I need to learn and I need to be on this journey. And and I am on a journey, but I've got some work that I need to be doing.
Yeah, that's right. If you're not careful, you can kind of set yourself up to fail if you create the wrong expectation. It's kind of like what you did with me at the beginning of this podcast. but yeah,
It's guilty.
by
Yeah.
giving me all these accolades, and now I need to deliver. No, it's you have to just be authentic, and that's another thing that I found in coaching leaders, just in general, without all of this justice stuff that we're talking about, just simply being vulnerable. So many leaders feel like they have to have it all together to be a great leader, and the opposite is true. The opposite is the way that they're really going to connect with their people, where they can have the appropriate boundaries, but have the right level of vulnerability to help people really connect with them and be on this journey with them, so that they can everyone can own what the group is doing, and they're not just taking direction from the leader. And that ultimately is how the leader thrives, and how the business or the organization thrives, when everybody owns the outcome. And that requires vulnerability. So it's no different as we navigate these complex issues of justice that we have to respond to, and know when to respond and when not to respond. And I have leaders come to me and say, well, should I respond to this? Should I respond to that? Like now it's like, what, it's incredibly complex and nuanced to figure out. Like, you could be responding to everything. Should we have a holiday for this, a holiday for that? Should we, it's really challenging right now.
Yeah. Speaking of challenging, I want to go back to the conversation we had last September, because that was one that was just as nuanced as the waters that we're talking about now. So flashback September 2020, almost 18 months ago, we found ourselves talking about how one of your objectives is really, to help the people that you're working with, primarily, CEO level folks, people who have power, have influence, and help them to prosper so that their entire community will flourish. So kind of meaning you kind of want to help them gain more success, more power, more wealth and influence, because if they're living, my takeaway from that conversation was, if they're living more other focused lives, then really this has the power to really not benefit primarily themselves, but to transform their entire communities. That was a lot to wrap our heads around, especially with the history. Jess and I spent time debriefing that of like, well, who has the power, who has the wealth, and this concept could be abused in the wrong hands or with the wrong heart motivation, right? And but we knew that wasn't where you were coming from, so that's why we got you back on. We're like, David, help make this make sense to us. So what I want to do is just almost bridge today to that conversation and say, hey, flash forward 18 months. You've been doing this work for a year and a half since that conversation. How have you seen that concept play out in your work? And what does this look like practically? Because I think that's like the $1 million question. And that's not going to be what we can pay you for this answer, but that's what the question is worth.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's a big question. So just to review a bit, so that concept comes from a verse in Proverbs 11:10, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. And the righteous is a Hebrew word, sadakim, that refers to people of power, wealth, and influence, who steward all of their resources not for themselves, but for others, and really for God's peace and justice. So you're right, this is abused in our world, where people of power use their resources not for others or God's peace or justice, but for themselves, and to hold on to power. But the idea in that verse is, if you are the Sadakim, then when you prosper, when you gain more power, wealth, and resources, then everybody rejoices. The whole city, even the poorest of the poor in the city, dance wildly in the streets which is counterintuitive because normally we're like, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Why would I want to dance in the streets? I should be resentful and bitter that this person is gaining more power and wealth. But because they're the Sadakim and because they steward their resources for God's peace and justice, everyone is dancing in the streets because they know when the Sadakim win, everyone wins. Now, that's a concept that is hard for us to understand. We don't even have a grid for it. We live in a win-lose world, not a win-win world. And part of what I'm hoping to do with that, with the people that I'm working with, is almost take the rails off of their guilt and shame for pursuing wealth and success and profitability. That it's okay, that even for me, who comes from a Christian biblical worldview, money's okay, but the love of money is the problem. Profit is okay, but it's how you steward your profits. And so oftentimes when we get into this conversation of justice, we really get locked up with how we are supposed to operate and don't have the sense of freedom in order to go out and really be excellent and successful at what we do. And then the issue is how then are we stewarding all of those resources for the good of the whole? And how do we pursue our lives from a we dynamic, us dynamic, versus me and I? So that's the big idea. And we've broken down, you mentioned the 4 qualities. These are 4 qualities that we've come up with in light of some experience, in light of unpacking that verse. But the 4 qualities are just leaders first see the whole playing field. Second, they build cultural competency. Third, they give power away. And fourth, they take bold and courageous action. So in terms of the question you asked about how this is being applied and what am I seeing, that's a really good question. The goal of this is to be careful not to just see application in all the things that people are now doing differently, although that's important, like outside of what they already do. The goal is to begin to rewire people, to sort of make people think differently, have a different set of lenses. Their DNA is sort of changed. So what I'm starting to see is in particular, is these leaders are doing the first quality starting to do it really well. They're starting to see. And that's a good first step.
Yes.
And I have to have that as a good expectation too at the beginning, because this is a long thing that we're trying to do. So just seeing things that they hadn't seen before, seeing things in themselves, seeing things in others, seeing things in their community that they would have passed by. Even emailing me when something happens and say, you think I need to say something, don't I? I need to do something to make send a letter out or an email out to my company. That's a great application or kind of a result of this work that we're doing. It's small and nobody's going to see it, but it's something that's happening. Now, the other 3, cultural competency, giving power away, and taking action, we got a ways to go. Those things are going to take a while, and I'm hopeful that we're not just getting content with talking about these things, but we're going to see some real measurable change over time that moves the needle on these issues. And I can talk a lot more, but that kind of gives you a sense of where we are with that.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. These 4 principles, these 4 qualities, not principles, but these 4 qualities. I mean, I think I get the part where they're like, oh, I see it. You said that's coming a little bit more naturally. Folks are starting to lean in a little bit more. They're like, okay, David, I get you. But that does still leave 3. And you said those are kind of coming along. We've got listeners who are like, I can, there's maybe imagining themselves being coached by you or, in a relationship with you around these qualities. Why don't you give us some insight on those other 3 just very quickly? I'm curious which one you predict based on your experiences coaching and leading and supporting executives these last couple of years. Which one is the one that's like that folks are white knuckling? They're like, this one just feels hard.
Yeah, well, you could almost throw a darts at a board and just pick which one. So let's start with cultural competency.
Okay.
There's a lot, people are at different levels of this quote unquote spectrum of how they navigate cultural competency. And it's not just race, it's thinking through economics and power and gender and things like that. So, if we're taking race as an example, there's a lot of questions about, how we lean into that conversation without being defensive. And what does it look like then for me as a person of power, a white male leader, to take ownership of some of the brokenness that has taken place as a result of race, instead of me not seeing it as my problem. The other big one that leaders are having to navigate is gender and gender identity, and how to navigate just the way that is played out in the workforce and the workplace.
Yeah.
So we're having to really think through that as well. So that's just very complex. Power, when we talk about giving power away, a lot of that has to do with redefining success and what that looks like. I'm going to stop here. Y'all hear my dog in the background?
Yes.
Is that a problem?
Now that I just heard him now in the silence, but before that, I hadn't heard him.
Is it okay for me to break and go?
Sure. Yeah. Do what you need to do.
Sorry.
Jess, am I good to come back on video?
Yeah,
I didn't know
because
why
you were in your
off.
opener, you were going in and out, and I was trying to. And at some point, the computer, the Riverside, actually put you on video, put you off camera twice. It did it twice.
Weird. All right, so I'll just finish off video
just to make sure. Yeah, I think I would.
Yeah, that's great. That's fine.
So I'll pick up back at gender
power.
Identity.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Or
that's
power.
That's great. Yeah, our editor can patch it. So feel free to just start whatever sentence you left off on over again.
The other one that's really challenging with our leaders is them navigating gender and gender identity and how that plays out in the workplace, and the ways that they navigate that. So that's a conversation that we're having as well. Then when we move to giving power away, the two things that stand out when we're talking about power is what is the right definition of success, and having a broader view of success. And the other is how we handle money.
Okay.
and how we think about money, and how we not just steward money, but what I've learned in being around these guys is they talk about money a lot, and not because they're consumed by money, but because money is the tool of exchange in commerce. And they, over time, learn how to play this game of business. And they then have to know how to use the tool of money and all of its complexity in order to win the game or play the game well. And so oftentimes they're thinking about an application to our time together in terms of being just. Is how do we help people really understand money? Starting with financial literacy, but even going beyond that, so that people can compete in the marketplace because they know how money works, how deals are done, how investments are made, who has money, who doesn't have money. How do you get new people in on a deal that haven't had access before? That's huge for us. And if we don't understand that these issues are economic, they're very complex, but economics is a huge part of this. And if we're holding on to our money too much, or we're hoarding it, or we're only seeing the way we use money as we go out and make all of it, and then we give some of it away, versus stewarding what we already have, and maybe even limiting some of our profits on a deal so that we give access to people who haven't had access before. That's what we have to challenge people. And that has to do with networks and who they're used to working with, and saying, look, y'all can't do the same thing all the time and get to a different outcome. So that's a real challenge. And that's, again, when you're kind of brushing up against what's comfortable, what's easy, who I hire, who I do business with, how I'm patient enough for people to build new networks over time with people who may not have had access. All that kind of thing becomes a really interesting and hard conversation, but it's one we have to have. And then taking action, I mean, we could talk forever about that, but you got to not talk about it, but you got to really do something. And we talk a little bit about how we need to think about the action that we take. So I'm hopeful. This is why the cohorts are 2 years, because it takes time. The first group that started 2 years ago, they were at their last meeting just last month, and they said, we need another year. I said, okay, well, I'll plan year 3. And so we're going to do year 3 with group 1. So it might become a 3-year thing. It might even be beyond that. But the whole point is that if we're going to rewire ourselves and really make a difference, it's going to take time. We've got to be patient while also having a sense of urgency too.
Wow. Yeah, that's there's a couple of things that stand out to me there, David. One is that you're talking about helping. We talk about a lot on the podcast, moving from asking yourself, what do I do, to how well do I see? And you're saying, I want to help people develop a lens in which they view the world differently. And that is not a microwave approach. And I don't think you haven't taken that. You're not doing a half-day seminar on this thing as a one-off, like, because you realize my aspirations are much deeper. We need to fundamentally change the way you view this
That's
thing.
Right.
The other thing, Jesse, you remember this makes me go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, so you're creating a new normal, and that's important because so many people come to this and say, I don't have time for this. Like, you're asking me to do something extra, or to, I don't place a burden on me, and I don't have capacity right now. Everyone's busy. So, but when you're talking about rewiring, you're talking about a new normal, which doesn't take more time. It just reorients your time. So you make different decisions. You make different choices. You engage different people. You still do the same things, but you do it in a different way. And that's critical for us to engage with this. And that's why I always push back. All the leaders that are in my groups are incredibly busy. I don't think any one of them would say that their experience in the group has been overwhelming, because it's created this new normal that allows them then to engage with these issues from a place where they have capacity. And that's very, very important.
Yeah.
So, David, our theme this season is fusion friendships. So since we last talked, we've really been kind of diving in a kind of a post-2020 world into these relationships formed around common passions across lines of difference. What's been a fusion friendship that's been especially impactful for you in this season, or kind of that has shaped you to equip you well for this season?
Yeah, well, I have a few, which is great. I have a relationship with Pastor Philip Walker, who's the pastor of Mount Pleasant Worship and Outreach Center, and Bridget Nelson, who's the leader of their prayer team. Our church has long had a partnership with Mount Pleasant where we pray during the pandemic, we prayed every Sunday morning as two churches together. And then now in person, we pray twice a week together. And over time, they've become very close to me, particularly Bridget and Philip. In particular, my nephew, Lucas, recently had a battle with leukemia over the last year and a half, and he died recently. And the prayer team at Mount Pleasant, basically adopted Lucas, and felt like they were as much, he was their nephew as much as he was mine. And so when Lucas died and we went through that as a family, the kind of relationship and support I had from them was just unreal. And experiencing that again, because recently my father just died, and I'm hearing from them consistently about how they're praying for me and my family. The other that stands out is Ken Jenkins and his wife Beverly, who live in St. Louis, just outside of Ferguson, and we have been friends for 20 years because of my work with Jobs for Life. And Ken has been involved with a development project in Ferguson as a result of what took place there with Michael Brown's shooting and how the community has responded there. And so I recently took a group of my leaders from my cohorts, 7 of them signed up to go to Ferguson, and we spent a day and a half with Ken and Beverly and with the leaders from Ferguson to see kind of behind the scenes what happened there and how the community has responded, and this extraordinarily impactful commercial development project. They bought a mall, basically, right next to Ferguson, and are doing just this comprehensive, holistic project to provide needs in the community through their small church. And so I was able to take my friends who are here to go see that, to get a vision for what this can look like, and to think real big about what it means to provide justice and healing in a community. This is something you never hear about, with what's going on in Ferguson. It's a small group of faithful people who have put all the pieces together to do a $13 million project. So Ken and I are really, really close friends, and through him and Beverly and Bridget and Philip and those relationships, again, I wouldn't want anything else. I don't. They expose me to a world and to vision that I need to see, so that I can have purpose in my life and see a big God. So I'm really thankful for them.
I love that question, Rob. I love fusion friendships. Makes me happy to hear how people are, just in relationship with each other and how it matters. That's cool. Thanks, David. All right. So the new year's around the corner. We're sort of dating this podcast. When everybody listens to this, it'll be Christmas time, but New Year's is around the corner. We're 2021.
Hard to believe.
Weeks out. Yeah, really hard to believe. We say that every year, right? That time just moves so fast, which means that what we do with our time matters. So we've got 2020 on right in front of us, David. What 2022? What is 2022? We're not going backwards, Jess. We're going forward. Did I say 2020?
You said 2020 is ahead of us.
I just hit the rewind button. 2 years.
You're dating in a different way. Yeah.
I am. I'm dating. That's right. They're like, wait a minute. What season is this? No, y'all. 2022. I want to know, since you have a couple of these cohorts under your belt, you've been working with lots of incredible leaders. What's the future of Just Leadership? And, personally, professionally, what do you have coming down the pike in 22? So, give us a glimpse into this next year, into the future.
Yeah. So I've been very open-handed with Just Leadership. I'm usually someone who really plans and strategizes and has a 5-year plan, and here's what it's going to look like. That's not to say I'm not planning, but I've just been really thankful that the doors have continued to open, and so I'm just going through those doors. So my plan is to continue the 4 groups that I have currently going. They're all at different stages, and then start 2 more in 2022, one at the end of January and one in August. So there's a calendar year group and a school year group. I hope to finish this book, at least have a draft by January, and then see where that goes, whether there's someone who's interested in publishing that book or if that's something that I will do on my own, and then see how it can be used. I'm working with a core group of companies and leaders that I coach on a regular basis and come alongside them in their leadership. And a few of them have given me the opportunity to do just leadership groups within their businesses. So I actually have a couple of companies where I do monthly gatherings of their employees, going through just leadership principles, tailoring the content that we do in groups for their employees, which has been awesome. I mean, it's been so good. And it's a great test for me to see how this applies. I've also been asked to do a class for recent college graduates. So I've been doing that this fall, and we'll do that again, hopefully next year. So I'm getting more opportunities to apply this content to different demographics of groups, as well as in a company context, so that this becomes part of the culture of a company, which is what I hope begins to happen. Even the leaders in my cohorts, we often talk about, okay, now how are you now taking this back to your business so that this is not your agenda, and everybody is now, right. The leader's got a new idea, and how do you really help the company and the team own this, and it becomes a part of your culture. So in 2022, I'm hoping to see that happen a little bit more and what that looks like. And then I'm just thinking through, and actually Rob is helping me. At some point, this gets too much for me, and I need to think about how to scale, like you said, Jess, beyond just having a book, but what does it look like over time to build a team, and what is the strategy for that? So again, I'm open-handed with it, thinking through ideas and letting things come to me as they will.
I love it. That's a packed agenda, friend. And I love that you're open-handed. I like how you put that. You're open-handed around just leadership, kind of letting things organically materialize, like almost in partnership with the energy around the cohorts. Mm-hmm. Like, where do we need to go next? What's needed, right? Instead of being so directive. I think it's outstanding.
Yeah, I found in order for it to work, it needs to be under the radar. It needs to be safe, in a place where people feel trust. And there's a real relational dynamic to it, so that people really want to be there. You have to want this. You can't be convinced that you need it necessarily. You have to, certain things have to happen. Either a peer needs to tell you that you need to do this, or something happens in your company that tells you that this might be helpful, or you just have something stir up inside of you that makes you want to be a part of this, and need the community around you, the support around you to do this, so you're not alone. So I don't go out and sell, because it wouldn't work if I did. So I don't think about marketing. I don't think about I've decided not to do any social media, all of that, because it undermines, maybe I'll do that later, but undermines, at least for now, what I've found to be the power of this.
Which is in and of itself its own bold and courageous action in our world today, Jess, right? Isn't it? I mean, for someone to say,
no doubt,
marketing strategy is to be like Fight Club, where you got to know about Fight Club to know where to find it and because you got to want it, and you got to be in the driver's seat. And we're not going to invest a ton in external marketing because that's just not the way the model sets us up for long-term transformation. David, this has been powerful. If people want to know how to find you and learn more about the status of your book, how to get a hold of it once it becomes published, upcoming Just Leadership cohorts, either across business or within their own businesses, access to your coaching, where could they go about doing that?
Yeah, the best and simplest way is just to email me directly. And my email address is david@spickardconsulting.com. My last name, Spickard, SPICKARD, consulting.com. And that's, would love to hear from you and can respond to whatever need or question that people have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. This is a very compelling continuation of the conversation we started last year, and really rewarding for me, especially just because David, he mentioned this. I've got to see his work up close, and so everything he's sharing now, David, there is no talking out of both sides of his mouth. He is who he is in the cohort on this podcast. There is a consistency to the way he carries himself in this work, and that's why it works. I think it's why he can say hard things, because it's coming from a place of love. To be able to be challenging, knowing he wants others to be able to really thrive. And I've been able to kind of take a back seat on that journey with him, and really enjoyed. And I hope other people who are listening that know either are that person that could benefit, or know somebody in their network that could benefit from this type of teaching and coaching and mentorship. Or maybe you just need a roadmap and a compass on how to form the fusion friendships like the ones that David have that have just blessed him so much in seeing the whole playing field. I would encourage you to reach out to him.
Ditto. Am I allowed to just co-sign that, what Rob said?
Yeah, there it is.
Wholeheartedly. Yeah. David, it's always a pleasure to have you on, because we kind of know how you're going to show up. And I think that's a beauty of you and how you move in the world, is that you are a consistent friend and you're constantly learning. So thank you for giving us that
and
gift.
you guys have modeled that to me. I mean, you all have set the stage for the kind of conversations dealing with hard topics in a way that's winsome, that draws people in, with being authentic and vulnerable and both graceful and truthful all at the same time. And then you model it through your relationship. Your relationship is incredibly authentic. It's not forced. It comes through all the time. So I love sending links to various podcast episodes from Just to my cohorts, because they get a dose of that, and it tees me up, and I hope what I'm doing tees you up too.
That's awesome. Thanks, friend.
Grateful for you, friend.
Thank you all.
Until next time. Until part 4.
Yeah, that was it. We landed
part
the plane.
4 of.
It's one of those moments like, let's just keep talking. But no, the
could.
podcast must come to an end. That's the thing.
Like we're at lunch together. Yeah, you're right. There has to be an end date.
What else?
We could keep going, but our listeners are probably ready to.
Let's call it a day. Okay.
Yeah, no.
David, thank you, friend.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time. Sooner than later, I'm sure.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, David. And scene. That was funny. Oh, he
hung up. Bye, David.
All right, see you, David.
I wasn't doing this like goodbye. I was doing.
I know. Well, some people do. That hadn't happened in a while, but it has occasionally happened, right?
It has occasionally. Yeah, it's fine if it happens with David.